So our next one is a nice way to wrap it up. You might not have noticed, but from the beginning, we've gone through what is open access, how libraries can make use of it and what they're doing with it, the sort of the practicalities. And now we're talking more about the individual authors, about many of you, your researchers, and how open access can really benefit you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over back to Caryn for her paper, which, Caryn, if you skip to the next slide, which is about open access for author visibility and impact. And it's a short snippet of what's a really great workshop that Caryn does a lot. So I love it. I hope you guys will as well. It's very useful. Over to you, Caryn.
Right. Thank you so much, Emily. I know you guys have heard a lot from me today as I've been co-hosting, so I'm going to make this really brief. But as one of the things Natasha talked about in her talk that she really mentioned in her key points, and also as far as a cost, is promotion, right? And visibility and things like that for your journal, but also as an author, right? So what my workshop focuses basically on how to promote research in with social media and basically sort of in the modern world with modern internet tools and things like that. Now, I'm not going to do the whole research, the whole workshop, but I'm going to show you a few things and the context where open access plays a role. And I want to start with what we as authors really want, right? We want to have an impact. Okay, so either that's meaning our citations, our level of citations, which help our promotion, but also a real world impact. We want our research to have an impact in the real world. So let's back it up. In order to start to get impact, you need people using, citing, and sharing your work, right? That means that they need to be able to access and read your work. That's where open access comes in. But in order to access and read your work, they need to be able to discover it and know that and in order to do that, they need to even know that it exists, and that's visibility, all right? So I'm just putting this in the context of my little sort of causal flow chart here, just to give us some sense of what we talk about in terms of the promotion piece. So one of the things I want you to think about it when we think about how open access publishing can increase your audience is in traditional publishing, the control and influence on these parts, the visible, discoverable, and accessible parts, is really pretty much in the hands of the publisher. They decide who basically, through their policies and fees, who can actually read your work. They are then also partly responsible for the indexes that it ends up in, and even for promotion, and particularly your individual article, they own the copyright. So where it gets promoted is up to them in a large part, right? And then we're reliant completely on scholars and practitioners for who's going to use, cite, and share that, right? So now today, in a combination of the World Wide Web, social media, and the development of open access, you and your institution have a lot more ability to actually influence the visibility of your work, the discoverability of your work by being able to actually put it in other like preprint archives and institutional repositories, and by choosing to have your work be open access, a lot more people can read it. And as a result, by our influence on these three phases, that means we actually have a significant impact on who can use, cite, and share our work, because we're actually increasing the number of people who have access to it. So we actually then get a little bit of an influence on the use, cite, and share process. All right. So that's what's worth thinking about, particularly if you're trying to advocate for open access in your institution. You can show this to the people who care about citations and university rankings, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, we have more control. So let me start with the visible piece. Well, I like to think of the world of knowledge as a busy souk, right? So there's tons of knowledge out there, and we all have a little piece of knowledge. You know, maybe we're a shoe or a book or whatever, or maybe we're a whole shop. And so the real question for us is, for us as authors, is who can see you in this busy world souk of knowledge? Okay. So now most of us as researchers, we publish in a scholarly journal. That's fantastic. And maybe you're indexed in Scopus or Web of Science or Google Scholar. By the way, we had a question earlier about whether Google Scholar is in fact an index or a search engine. It's both. Google Scholar actually does have a lot more comprehensive metrics for tracking citations, and they have what is the equivalent of sort of the site score, the impact factor, the H index, which measures it measures citations in a different way. So it's a little bit of both. But anyway, sorry, I digress. So we're in scholarly journals, right? But there's a lot of other places that you can see where information is. And Natasha talked about it, Vanessa talked about it, a lot of people talked about it. I learn a lot about new academic work through topic alerts that I get through ResearchGate and academia, even if I don't have access to the full text there. There are tons of subject blogs on every academic subject that exists. There are hashtags in Twitter. And for those of you who are not aware, Twitter really is a very major vehicle for communicating academic scholarly, well, for scholarly communication generally. Many professional and academic networks put updates in LinkedIn or less degree in Facebook, but also these associations have newsletters and blogs and even a lot of academic content being published as videos or images associated with links to research, right? So there's all these places. So if your paper gets published in a scholarly journal, but that's the only place they can see you, many people are never going to find your research. So what I advocate is that you want to try to be everywhere. Now, of course, you're not going to learn how to do it all at once, and I'm not going to do that today. But I do want to talk a little bit about that visibility and what I mean by that. And just to give you an example, 2 examples about how this happens so you understand. This yellow ring is about semi-formal publications, targeted active things that you do. Maybe you do a blog post or you post images or your data online. Blue stuff is informal communication. Maybe you comment on a blog post or you send an email to a friend when you're sharing research. The red is semi-formal communication, but more passive. It's about making sure that you have profiles in Scopus, Web of Science, ORCid, Google Scholar, so that you're findable basically, and that you tag your content. Remember Vanessa talking about metadata? So those are the areas. So let me give you, I'm sorry, I'm talking super fast. I know, I get excited about this. All right. So let's imagine a situation. I'm reading a blog about some topic that I'm interested in, and I read your comment on that blog, and I say, oh, wow, that was really interesting. That person sounds really smart. I wonder who they are. And so I go and look up your profile on ORCid, and I look up your Twitter account, and I see a tweet you made, and that leads me to your ResearchGate account, which leads me to your formal paper, right? Here's another example. So somebody's reading a tweet that sounded interesting, and they know it would be of interest to their colleague. They send them a message about it. That person looks you up on Google, and then they end up discovering your LinkedIn account, and that links to your paper. So, right, all these different roads can lead people back to your formal paper, which ideally is where you want them to be so they can use, cite, and share your work, right? Fantastic. But here's where things can go horribly wrong. All right, here I am. I have found your formal paper, right? I have found your formal research. But a lot of times what I land on is a journal page that only has the abstract, either in a database or the journal page, the abstract and maybe a little citation metadata. Now, if I'm lucky, when I click on click full text, view full text, my institution has a subscription and I go right to your full text and I read it and it's amazing. And I say, I use it in my work, I cite it and I share it with other people. And you are a happy author. That little smiley face, that's you, the happy author, right? So ideally that's what happens, but usually often what happens when I click on view the PDF, what does it say? It says, how much would you like to pay? And what happens is then those links get stuck at this wall for their institution, or if you're an independent scholar. So all your papers over here, these people, we never get to read your full text, right? Sad author. Well, actually, you're probably not sad because you don't even know how many people are not getting to your work. You don't know that all these people were interested, but they couldn't get to it. So in thinking about open access, you can imagine already where the story goes, right? So in open access, when they get to your formal paper, they can click right ahead and go right to the full text. And so they get more of it. We're just talking particularly about volume. which means if they can read your full text, we can use it, cite it, share it. And what does that generate? Impact and happy authors. So now I've just been talking about, I use the example of a research paper, but of course this applies to all kinds of open science, whether it's data or workflows or anything. And I know, as I mentioned, having your profiles and using your profile to leverage all of that open science. I know Nabil's going to talk about that in a minute. The one thing that I want to leave you with after this illustration is also just a reminder, not only about why open access is able to increase your visibility, your impact because of its increased accessibility, but is also to hopefully you walk away with the feeling that yes, you need to leverage as many resources as you can, including open access, to be able to adequately really share your work with all of the people, be visible, discoverable, and accessible. And in leveraging all those resources, I just want to put a plug, not only for Nabil, but for the Open Access Directory presentation, which comes after Nabil, because the Open Access Directory is an incredible resource. And it's definitely one that provides lots of resources for you that will help you in advocating for open access moving forward. So I think, Emily, I think that's all you need from me, and
Brilliant.
We can go on to Nabil, maybe?
Thank you so much. I'm sure everyone will join me in saying how useful it is. I think we often forget how much the individual author can do to promote their own work, to really help get their name out there, to get their research read. There's so much that we as researchers can do to be more proactive in that. Anyway, now on to our next speaker is Nabil Gasifi. He is the engagement lead at Orchid and is offering us a talk about how Orchid can help researchers, research funders, and improve research outputs. So over to you, Nabil, if you would like to turn on your video and speakers.
Sure. Hi, Emily. Hi, everyone. I hope that you can see me well and hear me well. Well, I'm not in my actually in my local office in Johannesburg. I'm working remotely these days from Tunisia. So hi from Tunisia, from the very top of Africa. And yeah, I'm actually based in Johannesburg. I'm engagement lead for global direct members at Orchid. I worked at the global consortia team. I started at Orchid as membership specialist, and then we restructured, and I'm now engagement lead. So yeah, I'm here today basically to share with you like an overview of what Orchid is, who we are, and what we are doing here. Also, I wanted to share a small introduction regarding persistent identifiers. These are very important to me personally, and I think it's very important. These are very important as well for the scholarly communication world and the open research, open science, and open access world. Right, so persistent identifiers, per definition, you know, from Wikipedia, this is very direct from there. Persistent identifier is a long-lasting, sorry if I'm speaking too quickly, but I'll just trying to catch up with timing. But the basic definition of persistent identifiers is that a persistent identifier is long-lasting reference to a document, file, web page, or other object. So here I shared a couple of logos and examples of persistent identifiers. I'm sure that you are familiar with some of them. I'm sure that you're familiar with the ISSN, the ISBN for books. The others are, we will go through them, and I will share small definition or small hint about those. Then yeah, so we have the grid ID, we have the ISNI ID, which is also an affiliation of the Ringgold database. We have, of course, the DOI, which is the Digital Object Identifier. I'm sure that you're familiar with this one if you are in the publishing world, and you're seeing a lot of publications with their DOI, you know, linked to their to the metadata, or even linked to the URL itself. We have also ORCid, and we have RAW. Sorry, yeah, please go ahead to the next slide. This is basically my analogy for open science. I'm thinking like PIDs are very important in open science in enabling, let's say, open research infrastructure in general. What I'm thinking of is a very analogy to what we are living in Africa and the Middle East world, in a simple neighborhood, where the kid of the neighbor is coming to request a teapot. I mean, this is a very simple example, and where this teapot, so this is mine, so basically I know what is this teapot, so it's this is part of its object identification. I know the children kids, because this is very known, and I know the neighborhood, I know his mother. As per the home identification, I really know them because they are very, they are my neighbors. On the other side, if you look on the left side, you find basically very similar elements. The teapot is equivalent to like a publication or work. Of course, tagged with an object identification like a DOI or an archive ID or even a handle ID. Then we have this person who is the author or the early career researcher, or even a simple contributor or innovator in the scholarly world. So I know this person. I would have like to see a method or to see a resolution to know this person electronically, because my systems, I have everything online, and I really need to identify who is, let's say, accessing this system. And of course, the organizational identifiers, like I shared previously, who are the grid ID and Aurora ID and part of ISNI. These are also very important in knowing from where this author or this user is coming from. Next slide, please, Emily. Then the other argument, let's say, of why we are here and why persistent identifiers are very important in scholarly communication. Not only because UNESCO, let's say, recommended this in their open access recommendations for, building policies for 200, I think, countries, maybe 2 years ago. Not only for that, but also because of, let's say, the importance of these persistent identifiers in lifting ambiguity in author's name and lifting ambiguity in, let's say, duplication of works and similarity of works. Next slide, Emily, please. So why PIDs? And I really like this quote from the below source, and this is a publication. Basically, it's saying that the issue of citation standards became important in the online world as well. The studies have shown that within few years of being cited, a significant percentage of web addresses go dead. And this is very, let's say, logical when we are thinking of basically how can we keep an URL in the open access world or an open research world alive, right? And always accessible, in a way, well, indexable by Google, and yeah. So the thing is that we really want to be very neutral with all the platforms and all, let's say, all the systems in open research. So next slide, Emily, please. So, sorry, Emily, yes. So these are the persistent identifiers for organizations. We have the ROR, which is the Research Organization Registry. We have the LEI, which is the Legal Entity Identifier. And we have the GRID and the Ringgold ID. So these are the, let's say, 4 known organizational identifiers for or persistent identifiers for systems to get interoperable, for organizations to get identified and uniquely identified through systems and through platforms and from publishing systems to funding systems and to even institutional and repository systems. In the next slide, we will be talking about persistent identifiers for contributors. And as you can see, the three, let's say, most popular ones are ORCid, Scopus, and Researcher ID. And this is a snapshot from University of South Australia LibGuide, where they really explain what about all these three identifiers and how they are applicable into the open research world or open publishing world. And yeah, so just in general to say that at ORCid, we are at 12 million now. So this is really having a good uptake. Then on the next slide, I have this is very great example on a publication where we have more than one Wang. So if I'm looking for the author who is called Wang in this publication, I will be certainly lost. And on the left side, we have this tweet, which I like, from basically a researcher asking who the author of this publication. And although this publication is from, let's say, very, very old age, this is really showing that this issue is very old in the open or generally in the scholarly world and in the publishing world. This is the schema basically that I'm thinking that is origin of the persistent identifiers for contributors. If you can see in the center how the handle servers or the handle ID is interoperable with the URL in general in a way of including metadata description, including the handle service in the metadata description. And when creating the URL for this resource, we will have an identified electronic resource, whether it is sound or text or video. And as you can see in the very bottom, we have the data site as a registration agency for DOIs, and we have also Crossref as another, let's say, registration agency. Then why PIDs are very important in systems interoperability and in participating in building, let's say, open research ready infrastructures, because simply that it's needed and demanded from authors and from contributors to research in general. So this is a tweet from an author saying that, complaining basically why all journals are not using ORCid or a simple way to log into their systems or publishing systems by using a unique identifier, and ORCid is just an example of that. And then, just to explain the auto-update feature. So this is a feature built in collaboration with Crossref and DataSite, where the researcher can publish directly on the publishing system of a journal or publisher with adding their ORCid ID. And because this publisher is, let's say, registered with Crossref or DataSite, the researcher or the author will see their publication automatically displayed on their ORCid ID. And this is thanks to the auto-update feature that is built with this partnership, ORCid, DataSite, and Crossref. This is a screenshot of an assertion via a system, and this is KAUST repository. KAUST is well known by their open access, let's say, approach and open access adoption. They really did a great integration using DSpace, and they managed to assert a lot of information about their students, about their affiliation in this slide. And on the next slide, about works basically, and anything related to their contribution, from conference posters to really journal articles or books chapters, or even any small contribution to a big project or work. What are the BITS initiatives and drivers? This started really in 2000, maybe 10, before even let's say the launch of ORCID. Some of these projects and some of these initiatives started at the time where the ORCID registry was launched. And some examples of them are the TOR initiative, which is the Technical and Human Infrastructure for Open Science. We have Odin. Odin as well is a partnership, ORCID and DataCite, in basically building this network or this network interoperability for open research community globally, and trying to include all participants in the let's say in this arena. Of course, the FAIR principles, which is keeping the data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. In Africa, we have LipSense, which is led by WACREN, which is the West Africa Research and West and Central Africa Research and Education Network. They really are advocate in, let's say, promoting what is open research, what are the persistent identifiers, and what are these bits are doing in general.
And Nabil, just to let you know, you've got 5 minutes left. I'm just aware you've got loads and loads of slides still, so I just wanted to update you on the timing for that. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So we go to the next slide. Great. So how to get involved? Basically by building policies and sharing best practice use of ORCID. So here at the right, you can see the ORCID statement shared by the NRF or published by the NRF, really mandating a sort or recommending all the researchers in South Africa to use ORCID, and let's say supporting organizations to adopt ORCID. Next slide, please. So here are the systems and how the NRF adopted ORCID basically in their grant submission system. So you can see that ORCID is linked here to a work or to a publication or let's say a submission work via the system or via this integration that is linking the NRF system to the ORCID registry. And same thing for the African Academy of Science. Yeah, sure. So here is the in Tambeko hub in South Africa, where they really having a consortium of almost 20 members, and they built a hub for these researchers to connect with their ORCID ID and to let's say have let's say less integration works for members on the technical side. So this is like a centralized platform for the researchers in South Africa and for the members, students and member researchers to connect through their institution using the seamless access technology. This is another example at NACOSTI, which is the National Commission for Science and Technology and Innovation in Kenya. They also adopted the same approach. They integrated ORCID in their system just to have this identification of authors and authentication of ORCID IDs. Then here, there's another example on the Identity Hub at IOSC, and you can see in the schema that the ORCID is really like any other identification tool or identification platform. This is really used in sign-in or login functionality, and then connecting the EOSC platform to the ORCID registry to read information or to basically push information as the integration is upgrading from time to time.
Just to let you know, Nabil, 2 minutes left. Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna close with these couple of slides. This is also an important slide to me because this was published this summer, and this is showing the UKRI reviewer recognition using ORCID. So they really upgraded their integration on their grant submission portal, and basically to link what the reviewer did on their ORCID record. So as soon as the reviewer is finishing their review, there should be a mechanism to link this contribution to their ORCID record so that they can have all the information regarding that review on their ORCID record accessible at any time. And yes, so next slide is really showing the ORCID presence in the world, basically. We are not very present in Africa, unfortunately, and we are working on that. But as you can see in green, where all we have consortia there. So I'm going to close with the ORCID Vision. The ORCID Vision is a world where all who participate in research, scholarship, and innovation are uniquely identified and connected to their contributions, affiliations across time, disciplines, and borders. So if you see ORCID deviating from this vision, please let us know and we'll be doing the needful. Then next slide, please. So this is the membership category. So it's very accessible on our website. So if you just hit ORCID membership on Google, you will find the page and you will have all the information regarding the consortium, if you want to build a consortium at the national level, regarding the basic membership, whether it is basic nonprofit or basic startup, and regarding the premium membership for more accesses and more, let's say, support from ORCID. Now, yeah, so this is a quote from ORCID showing how PIDs are important. So this is actually quite an old slide or tweet. But in general, this is a call for what we are doing every year, like PIDapalooza and a lot of events that are inviting all the PIDs actors to showcase what they are doing in new, what they have as updates, and really to get closer to the community and share what persistent identifiers are and how the community can benefit of that. And thank you very much, Shukran. And it was a really great pleasure to be in the panelists with all of you. And yeah, happy to always support the Knowledge E family.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nabil. And I can say we've had a lot of questions in the chat channel regarding your talk. So there's a lot of interest in ORCID now. And finally, our final presentation for the day, it's our great pleasure, both Caryn and mine, to introduce Peter Suva, who you will have heard in our plenary is often referred to as the founding father of open access, and Nancy Pontika. Peter and Nancy are both involved in key roles in the Open Access Directory, but I will hand over to them because they can tell you a lot more about it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here to talk with you today. I often talk to audiences about open access, but I'm very rarely asked to talk about the Open Access Directory. It deserves a higher profile in the open access world, and I'm delighted to be able to talk about it today. I'll be talking about the origin or the founding of the Open Access Directory, and then I'll turn it over to Nancy, who will talk about other aspects and features of the Open Access Directory. I co-founded it with Robin Peake in 2008 because we needed something exactly like the Open Access Directory. For about 8 or 9 years before that, I was maintaining a hand-coded HTML page listing certain important developments in the rise of open access. And in the early days, when not much was happening, this was actually sustainable. But as open access grew and grew, this became unsustainable. And I was looking for a way to crowdsource the job of keeping track of what was actually happening in the world of open access. And I thought a wiki would be the perfect way to do it. And at that time, I was in between, let's say, employment. I had quit my previous job to work full-time on open access, and I had not yet been hired in my current job. I had no institution that could host this wiki. And I was working with Robin Peake on a number of other open access projects. And I asked her whether her institution, Simmons University, could host a wiki to do this job. She liked the idea. And then we talked in detail about exactly what the wiki should look like, what it should do, what its editorial policy should be. So we agreed. And ever since then, since 2008, the wiki has been hosted at Simmons. I should back up and make one more point. When I thought a wiki would be the best format for this ever-growing list, contributed by everybody who might have something to add to the lists, I first tried Wikipedia. I thought that would be perfect. But every time I added one of my lists to Wikipedia, it was taken down by other editors or contributors to Wikipedia. And in the discussion back and forth with those people who deleted my lists, they kept saying, this is not neutral. And I have to say, with all respect, they were simply wrong. These lists are very neutral. For example, if we list the open access data repositories and we get it right, that is, we list things that are truly open access data repositories, then there's nothing biased about that. It's a completely neutral list of repositories that serve a certain function. I put up several lists of that kind in Wikipedia, but they were repeatedly taken down. And if you ever tried to fight with people in Wikipedia who disagree with you about something, it can be enervating. And I just lost the will to continue. So after 3 times in which people deleted the list from Wikipedia, I talked with Robin about launching a separate wiki. And that's when we launched the Open Access Directory at Simmons. But I should say, ironically, since Open Access Directory has become large and successful, some of our lists have reappeared on Wikipedia, which, by the way, I think is a good thing. Wikipedia has more eyeballs than the Open Access Directory, but they've accepted that our lists are neutral, and yet our lists are still more comprehensive than their lists. Robin died in 2015, and if you were in the event earlier this morning, you saw that Naresh Agrawal and Jeffrey Pomerantz dedicated their presentation to her, and I can repeat that dedication. Robin was a very valuable co-founder for the Open Access Directory, and she was the editor-in-chief until her death, and Nancy took over after that. Okay. If you explore the Open Access Directory, I hope you do, you'll notice that it does not consist of articles like Wikipedia. It consists of lists. And again, it's a carryover from my original handmade page of lists, but why lists in the first place? On my page, why lists in OAD? Why didn't we change that to articles like Wikipedia? We certainly had enough space to hold articles. There are a couple of reasons. In the early days, and also today, there are disagreements, differences of opinion within the open access movement. None of them are, I would say, schismatic. None of them are terribly harmful. But if we wrote articles about the benefits of, let's say, repository-based open access versus journal-based open access, there would be endless edit wars. That's the term Wikipedians use. People would disagree with each other. They would erase each other's sentences. They would rewrite each other's sentences. By skipping narrative and opinion and sticking to simple factual lists, we hoped to avoid edit wars. And by the way, we've succeeded. We've never had edit wars in the Open Access Directory. And there are edit wars all the time, even on the pages in Wikipedia devoted to open access. Similarly, it's very easy to add a new item to a list. It's easier to do than adding a new paragraph to an article or adding a new nuance to an article. And finally, maybe one of the most important reasons was readers can confirm that the entries on our list are correct, are accurate, are neutral. All they have to do is click through. If we say that a certain thing is an open access data repository and we include the link, users just click through to confirm that indeed this is an open access data repository. So that helps open access directory build trust. We wanted it to be accepted as an authoritative reference work. And by sticking to lists, I think we've been able to do that. That's where I'll stop, and now I'll pass it off to Nancy.
Thank you very much, Peter. I don't know if you can see me. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can see and hear you.
Perfect. So I'm going to take over after this very nice introduction that Peter has given you about the Open Access Directory. If you would like to move to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to say that the Open Access Directory has an editorial board, and it does not like move on its own. And we have both editors and administrators, and we also have an editorial board. The purpose of the editors and the administrators is to work on the lists and do a more day-to-day things. Whereas the editorial board has like a more authoritative role, and it is there to provide like to give us their point of view about more about bigger issues about the Open Access Directory. But nonetheless, we are very excited to have all these key people in open access with the Open Access Directory, and we believe that the publication is going to have a very good future with their contribution. Next, please. And then actually, I wanted to have this slide over here because I wanted to stress as much as possible what Peter said in the beginning. And his words were that he used to maintain HTML web pages, but when the open access movement became too big and a lot of things started happening, then it was not possible for him to maintain this HTML web page. And then when we created the directory, we realized that it was very, very, very difficult to maintain the directory ourselves. And what I would like to say here is that we need, like the Open Access Directory is a community project, and we need everyone's assistance in order to keep it updated and to keep the lists, the URLs updated, but also with the creation of new lists. And the reason that I'm saying this, it's because open access now, it's a global topic. It's not like a local topic. Therefore, there are things that happen in languages that we cannot speak and understand. And there are things that you can add to the directory and keep it more updated. Therefore, you can look at the community volunteer space of the Open Access Directory, and you can also find, if you would like to move on to the next page, you can also find how you can add contributions. This is a window from the main page of our wiki, and over there you can see how you can create an account, how you can create wiki, like how you can edit an entry, or how you can create a new entry. For the time being, we are having a very small problem with regards to registrations, because what I would like to say is that at the beginning, when we first implemented the OAD, we did not have any all users were able to create an account and get access to the directory. But then we realized that we had a lot of spamming, especially during the weekends, and we did not have the capacity to have the people to monitor these spammers. Therefore, when you create an account, then this account is not automatically being created, but it goes over me, where I check the validity of the information provided, and I just ensure that you are a real person and not a spammer or not like a robot, for example. Therefore, you can find all the information at the OED main page. Next page, next slide, please. And I also urge you to look at the frequently asked questions, because over there we have a lot of information with regards to how the open access directory is being created, and how you can create an account, and for example, why the OED and not Wikipedia, and some other valuable questions. And next one, please. And then those are the new features that we have at the Open Access Directory. So we have an integration with Wikidata, and all the emerging lists in the See Also section at the bottom of the list. So if you go at the bottom of each list in the directory, you will be able to see the See Also section, and this leads to Wikipedia. And then we also link every related entry to another project that Peter has, which is the Open Access Tracking Project. And the Open Access Tracking Project, it has tagging libraries, and there is now a relationship between those tagging libraries and the entries at the Open Access Directory. Yeah, if you would like to move on to the next slide, please. That is the end of this presentation, and we are happy to take questions, because the Open Access Directory is a live source of information, and we would like everyone's contribution in order to be able to make it sustainable and make it useful for the audience. And in this page, you can see where you can follow us on Twitter. And if you have any questions, you can always email us at oed.contact@gmail.com. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Nancy. That was incredibly interesting. And I'm ashamed to say I didn't know as much as I should about the Open Access Directory before Caryn put me in touch with both of you for this talk. So thank you so much. We will have lots and lots of time for questions shortly, because this was a really, really great topic. I think all three papers have been very meaty, and I think everyone will have a lot to ask about them. But before we do that, as before, we have our final little group engagement activity. So you know the drill by now, everyone. Scan the QR code on your phone, or go to the chat and find the link, or just go to Mentimeter and type in the code that will shortly appear on the screen. So we're just going to skip through, and this is the one from previously. So if we can go on to the next question.
Nope, this is the first one.
Oh, it's the first one already. Okay.
Yep, I got my act together and advanced it.
In which case, yeah, the first question is, making articles openly accessible significantly increases the number of times they are cited by academic research. True or false? After Caryn's paper, you should all know the answer to that one. Good. Most people? Good. Who said false? It does. It had, well, not categorically, it won't necessarily. There's no guarantee that, unfortunately, what we've written people actually want to read. I know I published one article back in my student days that is still many years later, over a decade, not actually being cited at all, shamefully enough. So next question. Can I contribute to the Open Access Directory? Oh, we've just had a really great talk on that. So everyone should know the answers now. Please do fill it in, submit an answer. Is anyone answering?
Yeah, sorry,
yes,
I just,
there we go. I was slightly worried there that no one had actually answered. Good. Yes, we can. This is a good answer. Good question. Caryn, should we move on to the next one?
it's our last one.
Final question, everyone. Please answer it. The open access movement has the potential to greatly benefit which stakeholders? And to be honest, I think we've actually had talks from all of these stakeholders today: medical professionals, students and researchers, maybe not students, but definitely researchers, universities, key stakeholders from across various developing nations in the region, and publishers. Good. Yes, I'm liking that. Everyone thinks that everyone will benefit. This is really what we want to hear. Great. Well, perhaps are we ready to go over to Q&A now, everyone? Great. Sorry, I'm just looking at the list. There's so many questions now. I don't quite know where to start. Bear with me while I go back through the list. There've been a lot. You're all incredibly engaged, which is great because we've got plenty of time now. Okay, so first of all, a question to Nabil. Have you given any thought about the adoption of blockchain technology in publishing and its possible relationship to the need for PIDs? Also, can I just say, could all the speakers from this panel, so Peter, Nancy, Caryn, and Nabil, please do turn your videos back on and unmute yourselves so that we can see you when you answer questions. So Nabil, if you want to answer that question.
Sure. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Mr. Cameron, for the question. So the answer is yes, because of the simple reason that the ORCID registry and the ORCID APIs are very interoperable with all different, let's say, technologies and different coding languages and different platforms. So I'm gonna quickly drop here on the chat box a link to a really recent integration that we did with Artifacts. Artifacts is a blockchain platform for scientific and academic research. And they basically built an ORCID integration, including, ORCID identification and ambiguity and lifting ambiguity on authors and users within their workflows and their processes in basically acquiring or receiving these works from authors, and also in linking their works to their ORCID IDs.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Also, this is a really interesting question. I don't know who might want to take it. Perhaps Peter or Nancy might want to start off with this one. To what extent are researchers who are using open access potentially guarded against or at risk of hacking and other malpractices? I don't know if anyone wants to take that one. It's a resounding silence.
I'm not sure what the questioner is getting at.
I think what they're getting at is whether, if we're looking at open access content, is there a risk of people hacking you, or even if you're publishing open access content, obviously your details are available. By the way, whoever the person who asked this question, if we need more clarity and we're framing it wrong, please do let me know. Yes. But whether, if you're publishing open access or using open access content, are you more at risk of hackers or people stealing your identity or spamware, I guess, spyware, for non-open access research?
I've never heard that the risk is higher. I've never even heard of a single case in which an author of an open access piece of research was hacked or had their identity stolen because their work was open access. I think open access web pages are as susceptible to hacking as closed access web pages. Any web page is susceptible to hacking, but I don't think open access raises or lowers the risk. I think it's orthogonal.
Okay, brilliant. Here's an interesting question. I wonder if it's something that would potentially link with the open access directory. Is there an online web portal where authors can list suspected predatory journals when they find one for others to discuss and confirm, particularly open access predatory journals? And this may also give an opportunity for the journal and the publication to put forth their arguments about why that should not be categorized as predatory. I appreciate it's quite a broad and sort of adjacent question.
That's a good question. I saw it in the list. There are more than half a dozen sites that track predatory journals, and none of them is crowdsourced. That is, they don't satisfy the conditions raised by the questioner. And I don't know of any crowdsourced attempt to identify journals as predatory and open that to discussion by just anybody. Of course, you can always do that on Twitter or Facebook or any other social media source, but right now, the current sources don't allow user contributions.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Nabil, I've got another one for you here. Is ORCID ID connected only with the Scopus platform?
No, well, so we have this this process or this mechanism which is called search and link wizard. So if you go to your ORCid record and go to the works section, you can easily identify the search and link functionality. And as soon as you open that functionality, you will find the whole list of in a way, service providers and integration with all these big platforms like Scopus, like let's say Google Scholar, PubMed Central, you know, all the very known, let's say, places where to publish, and those search and link wizards really make the life easier for the researcher in terms of synchronizing works from these databases or these platforms into their ORCid records. And if you have any question regarding this and how to use this, please don't hesitate to write to us on the support desk, and we will be very happy to respond.
Brilliant, thank you so much. We just received, oh yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to add to my earlier question. Once upon a time, there was a wiki that took user comments on journals. You wanted to know whether they were predatory or not, whether they were high or low in quality, whether the submission process was easy or difficult. Unfortunately, it failed and it's now offline. But that came close to doing what the questioner had in mind. And I might have left the false impression that the existing attempts to classify journals don't accept user suggestions. They all accept user suggestions. They're just not crowdsourced like a wiki.
And do you know, did it fail because people, sorry, this is a question for me, just following on because it's an interesting topic, and we've had a lot of inquiries about predatory journals today, so I think it would be useful for our attendees to know. Do you happen to know whether it failed because people were potentially abusing the more crowdsourcing element of, you know, contributing content and perhaps either offering misguided or unreliable or unfair views, or did it just fail for lack of uptake in general?
I think it failed for a lack of uptake. And we know, running the open access directory, that sustaining a wiki, that is having technical support for a wiki, having institutional support for a wiki to keep it online, can be a problem. And some wikis fail for that reason. But I think this particular wiki failed because there weren't enough user contributions.
Okay, thank you. That's really good to know. There you go. Anyone, if anyone's ever interested in setting up a crowdsourced channel thing, users beware, it's a valuable source, but you need lots of support. Yes, Caryn.
I wanted to kind of jump in my other hat, in my sort of partial host hat, because I wanted to actually, we were trying to be very careful. I told Nancy that we may not be able to do the website live just because for technical difficulties. And so I just wanted to make sure that we highlighted the kinds of things that are in the open access directory in this table of contents, because Peter and Nancy were talking about how it was lists and they gave a couple of examples of lists, but actually let me make this a little bit bigger so people can read it. But these are the kinds of lists that you guys have on the open access directory. And I think, Peter, when you were just talking about crowdsourcing and, you know, whether that fails or not, I think one of the things that's really valuable about this open access directory and it being really community oriented is that it allows for people to contribute and add to these different lists, because as we saw today, you know, different larger organizations have a very narrow, you know, they have a specific focus, right? We just do these IDs, or we just do metadata, or we just do linking or whatever. And the other, the ability to have a central place that's developed by the community with different aspects of it is really important. So I hope people are able to see this list. I hope I'm going slowly enough so I don't make people dizzy. I also wanted to then throw out to Peter and Nancy a question about, all day today, we've been having various questions, yes, about predatory journals, but also a lot of conversation about how do we build awareness? How do we help institutions develop open access policies or structures or funding or whatever that can actually help strengthen open access uptake at universities and institutions. And I was wondering, since you guys are so intimate with your own lists, if there's any lists that you guys have in here that come to mind, or other websites that would be your recommendations on things that institutions could do to help promote and institutionalize open access.
That's a hard question, because there are general pieces of advice that any institution could take up, but every institution has different circumstances, different local politics, and the advice to help them the most would have to be customized for them. And there's no general website that gives customized advice. There are people who give customized advice. And I recommend that any institution that wants to adopt a policy or take further steps should identify people who are willing to do that, able to do that, and maybe have already done it for institutions that are much like your own. If the university down the street or across the country has already done something like what you have in mind, talk with them. How did they do it? When they deliberated, what were the factors that led them to their decision? What were the obstacles? What were the objections? How did they overcome those objections? You have to seek customized advice because there's no general place where you can go to find it. On the other hand, having said that, I maintain a website with a colleague on,
Yeah, feel free to drop it into the chat if
yeah,
you.
I did.
Yeah, there it is.
I
Okay.
just forgot to put the title on it. I maintain a guide to good practices for university open access policies with a colleague. And you may know that my university has a rights retention open access policy. It was the first one to do that. And we began to gather experience on what it would take to adopt a rights retention open access policy and to implement one. And then we wrote it up as a guide. It's a wiki. We keep it up to date. It's a dynamic document. It now also reflects the experience of dozens of other institutions with the same kind of policy. So even though it's not customized for your institution or any given institution, it does focus on a certain kind of policy, and it does offer basically all the help that we can fit into a wiki. Whenever we think of something new, we add it.
That's
Great,
really
sorry, I was
interesting.
delayed on putting it up on the browser. Got it there, so sorry.
Caryn, if I could just jump in at this point, because we've had a really interesting question that ties in with what Peter was just talking about. So this is obviously, I think, from a faculty member or maybe a student, I don't know, saying, are there resources in the open access directory for helping me to convince my university to support open access within tenure and promotion? I guess it is a researcher, and in helping authors with funding for article processing charges.
Yes to the second, not to the first. On the second, we have a list. It used to be called, I think it's called publisher. I'm sorry, funding for open access publications or something. Nancy, can you find the exact title? But open access funds, maybe that's what it's called. So when universities have funds to pay article processing charges, either for articles or for books, we try to list them in the open access directory. And every now and then one of those funds folds up or is laid down, and we have a separate list of the ones that have been discontinued. But we try to keep the list of active funds accurate and up to date. So you could go there to see if your university has one, but because our list might be slightly incomplete, you should also check with your own institution, check with librarians at your institution to see whether yours has such a fund. But on your first question, is there a list in the OAD for arguments persuading universities to adopt good policies?
Statistics, maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, well, let me get to statistics separately, but we don't have arguments because that requires just the kind of narrative and opinion that we want to exclude from the directory. So we simply list facts, like here's an open access data repository. Here is a publisher of open access books, and so on, according to different categories. But we don't have a list of good arguments. We've deliberately avoided that, even though I'd love to make my own. It's just the kind of thing that others would want to quarrel with. So we want to avoid that kind of edit work. But we have a list. Unfortunately, it's a little out of date, but it was a very good idea, called Open Access by the Numbers. And it was an attempt to gather statistics about open access. And if a certain statistic was out of date, then we always had a link next to the number, so somebody could click through to the current number and then update the open access directory. And people who wanted a statistical profile of open access could just go to one place and get it. And it's a pretty wide-ranging statistical profile, but unfortunately, people have not been updating it as much as they should. So many of the numbers are out of date. But another feature of that list is that every number is dated, so you can tell when it's out of date. And if you're
And you have all those,
Numbers.
yeah, you have all the links here, so that's fantastic.
Exactly.
By the way,
And we do that.
attendees, if any of you want to update anything on the ODA, if you're
Yes.
interested in the statistics and happen to be reading,
Please do.
check and update them while you're there.
The links are there for two reasons: to confirm that the number is accurate, and then to help people update the number if they have a little time.
It's brilliant. There's so many numbers. Thanks for scrolling through all of these, Caryn. I'm going to have to go. I love looking at behind the scenes statistics. So you've just given me like a giant treat. I'm going to do about the rest of you, but I know what I'm doing for most of this weekend. Nancy, I know you're having a bit of trouble with your internet connection right now, but if you are able to turn on your screen or at least answer, I have a question for you. One of our attendees says, Nancy, I'm aware that you recently completed a study where you looked at institutional promotion policies to examine whether open access indicators are mentioned. I believe you made a number of recommendations for institutions based upon this study. Could you share some of those recommendations with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. I will try to turn on my video. I'm having some issues. That's why I try to keep it shut for a little bit. So yeah, we've done this work as part of the European project, which is called On Merit. And we have looked at the promotion review and tenure documents, institutional promotion review and tenure documents. And then we've made some suggestions to policymakers, to funders and to researchers. So with regards to policymakers, we recommended that they should strongly support the principles to change the PRT policies and try to accommodate open access component. And with the term open access, I mean like all the components that are around open science and components that even relate to RRI, responsible research and innovation. And include more indicators that would necessitate a change in the way that researchers work. And then we also made recommendations for the research performing organizations, for example, where they should be doing more to encourage this embedding of open access, open science aspects in the policies. And they should be doing that in every research institution that they can find. And then we should try to avoid this one size fits all approaches. As Peter was saying, there is not like such a thing that everything fits for everyone, and this could have, everyone needs their own attention to their own institution. So therefore, we should try to avoid those approaches, and then we should try to design reformed processes that relate to the differentiation that every institution has, and those contain like all the frameworks, but also all the details and technicalities with regards to the gender, for example, the diversity of one institution or the career stage. And all in all, we also gave some recommendations for researchers, and that should be themselves to change the way that they conduct research and to try to introduce more into their research processes open access components, like open science components, like sharing data or publishing open access their research results, so that they can be, so that they can show that there are more important factors with regards to research assessment than, for example, the journal impact factor, which is an outdated quantitative indicator that does not mean a lot of things anymore.
Hey, can I just jump in here? And Nancy had sent me the link to the study work on Zenodo, and Dean put the link in the chat. So if anybody's interested in that study with those recommendations, Nancy. I put the link, had him put the link in the chat.
Yes, thank you, Caryn.
Thank you, Nancy. That was a really, oh my God, there's just so much there. I'm probably going to have to play the recording again to make a list of all the different suggestions that you made, as well as reading the article. But one thing that I think both the impact factor is obviously it's something that's come up a lot, and it might be something that we discuss in a later workshop perhaps, because it's clearly very important to everyone. But I sort of just wanted to cycle back. There was a really big question that we asked right at the beginning that someone asked and we proposed to the plenary speakers. And I think it would be quite a good one to address now, which is, obviously we're all doing so much. We're really driving open access forward, and we're trying to make it, it's already a global movement, but trying to increase the engagement with it at every level of the scholarly ecosystem. But what do you, all of our speakers, and to be honest, any of our speakers, previous panelists who are still here, please do turn on your cameras and weigh in if you want to join us for this. What more could we do to make open access successful, both globally, but also perhaps within this region, which is obviously our focus? Anyone want to take an answer?
Hey, Peter, this is a good place for you to actually talk about the open access directory tracking project, huh?
I'd be happy to. Is it a direct response to the question? Because I don't want to take us off course.
Well, I was thinking that because Emily was talking about how to promote stuff in the region, and because your open access tracking project has regional tags, and you have a tag for this region, and that's, I think, maybe one way for people in the Arab world, Middle East, North Africa, whatever, to be able to coalesce around something. So if you want to at least tell, because I mean, Nancy had it in a slide, the open access tracking project, but she didn't talk really much about it.
Okay, I don't need to be asked twice to talk about the open access tracking project. Let me put a few links in the chat, first of all.
Great, and I'll pop them up on the screen for us.
Wait a second. I had something else in my paste buffer, hold on.
Let's see.
Okay, the history here is somewhat parallel to the history of the open access directory. Since for about 20 years, I've been tracking everything that's going on, everything that I have time to track. And I used to have a blog that tracked everything that I came across. Not all those things were suitable for the open access directory. For example, if there was a new article about open, I wanted to flag that and bring it to people's attention. If there was a debate about it, if there was a new policy, there were many things that the directory did not track, but I wanted to track in my blog. And in the beginning I could, because there was not that much going on compared to today. But then as the open access movement grew, there got to be too much. And I looked for an alternative to my blog for tracking everything that was going on, not just the things, the subset of things that could be tracked in the open access directory. For example, all news, all comment about open access, I wanted to track. So just as I moved toward a crowdsourced solution for the open access directory, I moved toward a crowdsourced solution for this, and I call it the Open Access Tracking Project. The link is right there in the chat. It's a tagging project, and it's crowdsourced, so that if you see some news or comment, some new development about open access, tag it, please. It depends on the many eyeballs principle. You might be the only one to have tagged it. For example, I tag things, but I might not have seen it. We have more than 100 taggers now, and none of them might have seen it. Or you might be the first to see it, and you can get it out into our feed before any of the rest of us could have gotten it out. We have lots of tags. We have a tag for every academic discipline. We have a tag for every country. We have a tag for every region. The tag we use for this region is the Arab world, or Arab_world. And if you see a new development in your country or your region or your discipline, please just tag it, but also add the appropriate tags for the country, for the region. And in the chat, I've also put in the link for the Arab world tag to show you what we've already tagged, developments that we already know about from the Arab world. And I'm quite sure it's incomplete, and I'm sure you'll recognize that too. So if you want to join the Open Access Tracking Project and help make at least that part of it more comprehensive, we welcome you, just as the Open Access Directory welcomes new contributors. And I also put a link in the chat on what it takes to get started as a tagger and to help us make our lists, our tags, tag libraries more comprehensive.
Brilliant, loads of links. Well, thank you. I mean, I think that was a perfect spot to sort of wrap up on. Just to say, we've got one more little thing to do before we say goodbye to everyone, but I just want to say thank you to all the panelists in this particular panel. I think it's been really great, and it's nice to work through, as I said, but at the start of this panel, this session, it's a really nice way, we thought when Caryn and I built the program up, to finish on the sort of the end user and future and looking towards what we can do next. And I think the Open Access Directory and the tracking project, of course, Vita, are, you know, they highlight the scope of what people are already beginning to do and what else we can do as individuals and as organizations.
And as a community, like that we're all in this together, yeah.
So on that note, Caryn, if you would skip on. So my job, very briefly now, is to just sort of summarize the key takeaways today. So first of all, as I said, thank you to all of our speakers. You've all been absolutely thoroughly brilliant. You've given us, all of you, from quite some hours now, looking at my watch, you've given us a really inspiring and thought-provoking series of presentations. And so thank you so much to all of you for contributing your time and valuable insights. As I said, I'm sort of supposed to wrap up now by offering some key takeaways. Other than the fact that predatory publishing is obviously a real bugbear, and I think we'll come back to that in the future and really try and address that in another workshop, I think we can all agree that the biggest takeaway today is that open access is incredibly important. And there are huge potential benefits for academic communities in general, and we believe for the MENA region in particular. Of course, open access isn't the answer to everything. There are continued issues surrounding funding, digital poverty, and institutional inertia that may never be wholly addressed. But a digital transformation is inevitable, and it really has the potential and power to benefit everyone. Caryn, if you could just skip to the next slide for me. So, as I mentioned before, one of our open access week activities was an online quiz full of sort of fun facts and statistics about open access. As I mentioned also, many of the questions were included in our Mentimeter activities today, and it's very nice to see that all of you got almost everything right. So clearly you're all paying attention to our presenters, which is good to see. More generally, this quiz was taken, it's been online for over a week now, and I was running through the scores before this event just to get some of the statistics out. The average correct score was 16.7%, 16.7 out of 23, which means the overall score, correct answers, was about 68%. Sorry, it's been a long day and statistics are not really with it anymore. So 68% were answered correctly, which is great. However, the greatest level of wrong answers related to key aspects, core facts about open access publishing, and some of them are quite concerning. Thank you, Caryn. Of those who took the online quiz, 30% didn't know what open access was. 19% thought that open access meant not peer-reviewed. 26% thought that open access meant predatory publishing. 48% didn't understand the different tiers of open access and more importantly, what this meant for them. 50% didn't know what an APC should cover or what services they should expect and demand from their publishers for open access publishing. And finally, 53% didn't know who owned the copyright to open access content. And based on these responses, it's clear that there needs to be better awareness of open access within the MENA region. And if you could skip to the next slide, please. And these results lend further to support to our decision at Technology to launch a free regional initiative to help support the awareness and development of open access across the Middle East and North Africa. This is still at very, very early stages, but our core goals are to work with key regional stakeholders, including all of you, to support the development of national and institutional policies to encourage the expansion of open access across the region, to support key stakeholders and institutions in developing the necessary infrastructure and research cultures to facilitate greater engagement with open access, to help develop funding policies and frameworks for every level of the scholarly ecosystem, to more generally enhance understanding of what open access is and its benefits, enhance awareness of where open access resources are and how to use them, and finally to support scholars with the publication and promotion of open access research. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, we're at the very, very start of this process right now. And so the first stage for us is we're looking for partners to join us and support this endeavour, individual researchers, institutions, and other key stakeholder groups. We're not asking for financial aid or anything else, just people to start to be interested and really help us work together to develop something. So the next steps are gathering expressions of interest, designing a roadmap and identifying the key goals, gaining signatories, and then finally helping to develop resources, activities, and policies to support open access within the Middle East and North Africa. Now, in a few seconds, we'll be wrapping up the event and you will see your final QR code. This will take you to a survey form. In addition to the QR code on the screen, Dean will drop the final link into the chat box. You know where it all is now. So please do fill in the survey with your details, both if you want to join us in promoting open access, or even if you just want to be kept up to date. Because together we really can help lead the world towards truly equitable and accessible education. So Caryn, if you would just skip to the next slide. So just to reiterate, this survey is really, really important to us. It's really helpful for us to learn what you as our attendees, as our listeners, got out of this event, what was most useful, and perhaps what topics you might like more information on in the future if we were to run another event. But also, as I said, so you can really indicate your interest in getting involved with our regional open access initiative, or just being kept up to date on open access developments within the region. So Dean will put the code in and we'll leave it up for a few minutes. And I just want to say thank you from me and from Caryn to all of our speakers and to all of you for joining us. We really appreciate it. You've made this day, well, lengthy afternoon, a real success. So thank you all. And I think Caryn and I will say goodbye to you now. So thank you.
Can I just say, I just want to have a last word before you have your last word. Oh, and they're good. There's the boss. Cameron, I was going to ask you if you could say something. Look, I want to say it's been also, from my perspective, been a fabulous experience. The speakers and the topics have been great, but I've been really loving the engagement on the chat and in the questions with all of our audience. So I'm really looking forward to having you all be an active part and a vocal part in our open access initiative. And so with that, I give it to you, Cameron, for the final word.
Well, thank you so much. Well, thanks. I would really like to give a big hand out to Emily for really coming up with the idea and really mobilizing the whole event, the whole day in just a short span of time. Of course, it couldn't have been done with your support and other team members within the company and all the hidden people that are not behind the cameras. So that's a big thanks. And of course, the fellow panelists who, with their presentations, have really made that day valuable and sharing all the insights and helping us in promoting the whole culture and the whole understanding around open access. And for everyone who has stayed with us till late at this time, in Dubai is a weekend. Friday is the day off. So, and for people joining from all different countries and regions. So it's a big thanks to everyone. And it's been a real pleasure to be here during today's event.
Brilliant. Well, in that case, once again, I think we can all say goodbye. We'll leave the screen up for a few more minutes just so you can take the code and take the link. And as I said, please do fill it in. We really, really do value your feedback, and we do want to be able to contact you in the future with other events and other developments in the Open Access Initiative. Thank you.